Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, or maybe at a different time of day if you are joining us on the recording playback. This afternoon, we will be sharing more about the federal fiscal year 2020 SOAR combined formula grant application. We're excited to be able to share that academic quality, early childhood facilities, and CARES equivalent will all be in a single grant application to be able to streamline the process for you and your teams. If, as we're going through this presentation, you have any questions, please enter them into the chat and we will get to them during the webinar today, or if we don't know the answer, we will follow up with you as soon as we can. And we will also be posting the slide deck. You can see it right now as a handout in this event, and we will also be posting the slides and the recording on the SOAR webpage on OSSE's website. So that is our housekeeping for the moment. My name is Jessie Hartize, and I am the Deputy Assistant Superintendent for Systems and Supports K-12, and excited to be sharing with you all some information to be able to complete your SOAR combined grant application. So this afternoon, we're going to walk through some background on the SOAR grant, some details on this specific grant application, as well as what it will look like for you in EGMS if you haven't had a chance to pop in there already. It is loaded in EGMS as of last Wednesday. And then a little bit about what you can expect in terms of review on our end, key dates that you should have in your calendar and the calendar for your teams, and then of course questions. And we will try to get to those as we go through as well. So please do take the time to enter in questions because we won't know what you're not sure about if you don't tell us. So help us help you. So to go ahead and dive in with background on SOAR. So SOAR is federally authorized, and the federal authorization includes a 3-sector approach, the funding that comes to OSSE, as well as funding that goes to DCPS and funding to support the Opportunity Scholarship Program. And overall, the goal of SOAR grants is to improve and expand the quality of public charter schools in DC. And so that informs our grant design, where you all have a fair bit of flexibility to do what makes sense for your campuses and students, but it has to be grounded in increasing the achievement and academic growth of DC public charter school students, supporting the improvement and expansion of high quality public charter schools, and supporting DC families by making it easier to take advantage of their school choice options. So a little bit about how we got to where we are today, because this application does look very similar in most ways to applications that you've done in the past, but it does look a little bit different. You were part of a process a couple of years back when we were doing our latest application to the Department of Education, but we went through an additional engagement process after the public health emergency sort of became reality this spring, and we, based on feedback from many of you on the needs of your schools and the needs that you just had not anticipated, we were able to work with USED to get additional flexibility to approach our SOAR grant a little different this year. And the 3 main changes are that we added what we're calling CARES equivalent allocations for LEAs that were not eligible for funding through the CARES ESSER grant. That's the formula funding that was based and only available to LEAs that received Title I Part A last year. So through this SOAR application, adult and early childhood charter LEAs that would not have been eligible for CARES ESSER funding will be getting an equivalent allocation. Additionally, we converted the facilities SOAR grant into a formula that is now part of this grant rather than doing a competitive grant this year. You know, I think someone said it best when we were having an engagement conversation that this is just not a time for winners and losers when it comes to facilities, and the Department of Education understood where we were coming from and appreciated the feedback that you all provided to us. So you will see that reflected in this application as well. And then the third piece will be in a subsequent application, but we did increase the amount slightly about that will be available to third parties to work with charter schools in the upcoming year, because we know that those needs are great as well. So those are the three main changes that we previewed this summer and that Ed did approve, and you will see reflected in the current application. Next slide. So since we have 4 different components that are in this formula grant, we just wanted to give a little bit of overview on each of the pieces. Some LEAs will have all 4 of these and some won't. And you should be able to see that very clearly in your allocation that is available on the SOAR website and also in EGMS. And we'll show you the page that shows you each component broken down. Next slide. All right, so digging in to a little bit more about what you can expect in this application. So first, the allocations that were shared in communication from Assistant Superintendent Nikki Stewart on August 10th have not changed. So those same allocations that were posted on the website on August 10th and shared in that letter with you are what you will find in the EGMS application that loaded last week. That will also show you the breakdown by sort of formula strand, so academic quality facilities, early childhood, and CARES equivalent. And it will also provide an OSSE program contact on our team, Corinne, Marie, or Rhonda. Next slide. And just a little bit of information in terms of eligibility. The CARES equivalent is really what's most unique here because it hasn't been a factor before, since this is the first time that it has existed. And those that were eligible for CARES equivalent are charter LEAs who were open and serving students last year, but that did not receive an allocation for CARES ESSER. So any charter LEA that did receive a CARES ESSER grant would not be eligible for that component of SOAR funding. All right, and then this is just a high level overview in terms of what's allowable. I think you've seen this chart before, but overall you want to ensure that your costs are going to be supporting that rich academic programming and helping you to achieve your broader LEA goals. There is quite a bit of flexibility in what that could look like for your project. So we know that you all have wide-ranging needs right now. So if you're not sure if something could be allowable with these funds, we really encourage you to reach out to your program contact to discuss before you even submit your application. If you're not sure if something could be possible or not, we are here to strategize with you and to help you make the best use of these funds given your current needs. Next slide. Okay, so after you submit your application, we want to tell you what you can expect. So logistics. First step is when it comes to an application, you all are familiar with the fact that we do application submissions through the Enterprise Grants Management System. And so your application will need to be submitted through EGMS. One thing that we are excited to share is that the time period, so the grant period for this application will go back to July 1st. So if you had eligible costs like maybe a salary for someone that started back on July 1st, that can be included in your application as a reimbursable cost, similar to how you may have handled costs for your consolidated application. So that does give you some flexibility. One area where there isn't flexibility is in the deadline for this application. So the deadline for this application is December 7th at 3 p.m. And this is to allow us to be able to provide notification to anyone who may be having altered allocations because someone may opt out. We want to make sure that these funds can be spent timely and for the pressing needs. And so if someone doesn't need funds, we want to be able to reassign them. Everyone knows that technology is only, we can only control it so much. So we highly, highly encourage you to not wait until December 7th at 2:30 to be submitting your application. Our program team and our technical team are here to support questions, but we are much better positioned to help you if we aren't waiting until the last minute. And you can expect to hear from us in the beginning of December if we haven't received your application. We will be providing direct reach outs to ensure that you can meet that deadline timely. All right, so this is what you will see when you log into EGMS. It will have the same tab format that you've seen in the past. And the two media sections of the tabs are going to be the main application and the detailed planning expenditures. A lot of the other sections either are informational only or are just going to have you entering brief narrative. So we'll go ahead and walk through these a bit. Next slide. Yep. So first, the general information tab is just going to provide some background on SOAR, some of what we shared earlier in the conversation today, as well as some eligibility information. There's nothing that you need to enter in that tab. Then in the contact tab, this is where you are going to provide information for who at your school is going to be most relevant for this grant. So you're going to provide the head of your organization, grant contact, fiscal contact, and then any additional points of contact that would need to reflect who's actually submitting the application. These are people that we will be contacting as needed for follow-up. So, just let us know who the right people are to be in touch with around this work. Then for your project overview, this is just a brief description. Think of it sort of as an abstract of what you are planning to accomplish with your SOAR grant. Then this is a section you're familiar with from multiple grants from OSSE. Your funding distribution is just going to have your total amount, and your detailed planned expenditure section is going to total to what you see here. There are check boxes if you're deciding to opt out of funding. That's the only reason why you would be taking action on this page. And here's where you're going to see the breakdown for the different sort of pots of formula funding that are combined here for your E's. So if you have all of these, you would see different amounts populated here. Some LEAs will only have a total in one or two of these boxes, but this will show you the breakdown of how your allocation is totaling. Great. So then in the main application, so this is where you're going to be spending the bulk of your time. And many of you may be doing this already, but we do encourage you to consider drafting some of this in a Word document or a separate application that you can then copy and paste into EGMS just to make sure that you don't lose your work. We definitely encourage you to save often in EGMS just to make sure that nothing disappears. Your comprehensive needs assessment is going to summarize the data that you reviewed to determine the need for this project, and then the summary of the need. we wanted to draw your attention to one thing that is a little different than how you typically had to handle project descriptions. And that is that with the combination of academic quality and facilities, the expectation is out of your total grant award that you will be spending 25% or more on academic quality and 25% or more on facilities, or that you describe how needs in those areas will be met. So for example, if your school does not need to use any of your allocation for facilities, you might say we are using local funding, or we are using CARES funding, or we just don't have facilities needs right now. So that is why we are using 100% of our SOAR allocation for academic quality. So it's asking you to either use to follow those breakdowns or to provide a rationale for why funding to support one of those areas isn't necessary. And if you have any questions about a specific scenario, feel free to follow up with our program team. Then in the main application, in your theory of action, you will notice that it is asking for you to connect your thinking around your plan to the continuous learning plan that you previously submitted to OSSE, so you should be familiar with that. And there is the priority question to ensure access for students with disabilities. And that's a question that I think you had in your last one or two SOAR applications, so you should be familiar with that as well. And then you'll see a link to download a performance measures template that hasn't changed either. And you will download that template, to your desktop and then complete it, and then upload the completed template into the application. And again, if you have questions on that, just let us know. For narratives, we just wanted to remind you to make a connection between the data, your needs, the project that you've determined, and research-based strategies. This is a good example from one of your colleagues about identifying their need around supporting academic instruction, that they were looking at research about how coaching could have an impact, and how they wanted to do that through classroom-based intervention and training in RTI. So this is, a connection for how their theory of action was playing out and how they were going to use SOAR funds to support this need. All right. Then in the detailed planning expenditure section, what you're going to do is reflect how you're planning to use different cost categories to support your project. And for each cost, you're going to provide itemized detail on the cost basis for that expense. Next slide. So this is where we can cut out some of the back and forth and try to get your application approved really swiftly, is making sure that each row, so each itemized cost, gives enough detail for us to be able to replicate how you did the math. So you'll see some examples here where instead of just saying we purchased laptops, being able to say we purchased X number of laptops at the itemized cost is going to allow us to get to the total cost that you're including in that row. And then also seeing that the timeline for when that cost is taking place is within the grant period. Is going to allow us to be able to see that it's allowable, reasonable, and allocable to the grant. Then there's an award administration tab, nothing that you need to do there. And there's also a supporting documentation tab that you've used likely in other grants, and this is where you would be the documentation in the future for any amendments. We know that your application right now is going to be your best thinking at this point in time, but that reality means that you may have changing needs, and that's why we work with you on amendments as necessary. So this is where you would upload that documentation in the future. And then for assurances, you're going to read through each of the program specific assurances. Then you're going to select the checkbox to certify that you are acknowledging and agreeing to those assurances. And then you're going to need to make sure that you click Save Page to be able to actually register the acceptance of those assurances. And if you haven't submitted the assurances, it won't let you actually go through and submit your application. So if you're having trouble, this is usually a good place to look back on to make sure that the acceptance took to the system. And again, if you need help, it's certainly something that we can walk through. And last but not least, when everything is your best thinking and you're ready, you're going to submit this application, and you're going to make sure that you're doing it by December 7th. And again, we do encourage that you do this as early as possible to ensure that we can support you if you're having any technical issues. If for your records, you'd like to print the application, you'll see a tab that allows you to print. The one thing to keep in mind is that you can't sort of print it immediately. EGMS generates on the hour. So, if you were to try to, click print right now, you would have to wait until the 3 o'clock print option. So just something to keep in mind if you are preparing something for your executive director and you're printing it out, you kind of have to think in advance because it doesn't work on the spot. All right, next. Perfect. So this is a formula application. So that means that we want to work with you to ensure that everyone who is eligible for this award and wants to receive it receives their full award amount. So if in your initial application submission, we have questions about something because we don't have enough detail to be able to award it right away, we will work with you to ensure that those revisions can be made so that you can receive approval for your award. So the expectation is that you have your best version of your application in by December 7th. That doesn't mean that it's a problem if we have to go back and forth on any sort of revisions. OSSE will be getting back to you by the end of the calendar year with our initial and hopefully final feedback on the application. Thanks, I just jumped ahead of myself. So I'm going to say it again, the application deadline is December 7th, and EGMS does close on the day of applications at 3 p.m., so keep that in mind. Our team will be completing our initial reviews by December 31st, which means you can plan to hear from us by the end of the calendar year. And the grant period does run with pre-award costs, meaning you can include eligible expenses back to July 1 of this year as part of your application, and the grant period will go through September 30th of 2021. And the urgency around making sure that you do submit by that December 7th deadline is that if you don't, we will take that to mean that you are not needing these funds, and we will just redistribute them to your other colleagues. And this is our team's contact information. This is also available in the allocation spreadsheet that I mentioned on our webpage. And please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We really want to make this process as easy and streamlined for you as possible, and also enable these funds to support your evolving needs. So we're happy to try to get creative to ensure that we can do what is within the realm of allowable with these funds, aligned to your needs. So what didn't we cover, or what did we cover, and that we could elaborate on further to help you? Feel free to put your questions in the chat.
There's a number of questions that are in the question section. I am happy to read through them if that's helpful.
Oh, that would be great. I don't see them, so this is why.
The first question is, can we use the full amount of for CARES equivalent, or do we have to divide it between SOAR AQ, SOAR facilities, and CARES equivalent?
No, so CARES equivalent can be used as you see fit.
Do you anticipate the facilities funding to be formula moving forward, or just this year?
It's a great question, and the short answer is I don't think we know yet, and we will certainly want to work with you all to determine, you know, sort of what makes sense and on what cadence. I just think right now we don't know what our universe is going to be for a little while, so we're prepared to continue to work with the Department of Education to revise again in the future, and you know, we'll want to do so in coordination with what makes sense for our community.
If we have to address both academic quality and CARES equivalent, how do we merge them into one application?
I'm not sure that I understand this question, so I will try to elaborate in a way that is helpful, and we'll also make sure we follow up with you individually to make sure it's clear. So CARES equivalent can be used for anything. I think that might help to clarify. And then for the amount that's reserved for academic quality and facilities, that combined amount, the bars there are that 25% be used for academic quality, 25% for facilities, or to provide a rationale. For the CARES equivalent, you are just building that into the rest of your plan. So that's actually the goal of this application, is that you don't have to do a separate application. It's just providing additional funding to be able to put towards your academic quality or facilities approach. So that may or may not have answered your question. We will definitely follow up directly to make sure we're giving you clear direction for whoever asked that.
Would the purchase of smart boards for the classroom be an eligible expense for either facilities as an upgrade to the classrooms or for academic quality?
Smart boards, sorry, can you repeat that one more time? Smart boards
Sure. For the classroom as an eligible expense for either facilities as an upgrade to the classrooms or for academic quality.
I think it would definitely be eligible. I should double check to see where we should categorize that. If it would need to be as an upgrade or just as an academic quality need. But in terms of it being an allowable expense, I think it would be relatively straightforward to be able to connect that to a need for improving academics for students. But let us get back to you on where would be best to categorize that.
Can early childhood funds go back to July 1? Do we need to be concerned with supplanting?
So early childhood funds can go back to July 1. In terms of supplanting, there's no supplement, not supplant provision for SOAR. So it's just whether or not it's going to help you to change the color of the money. If it helps you to free up local funds by using these, you have that option if it is written into your approved plan.
Since this is essentially multiple grants combined, should we list multiple project overviews for the various buckets?
If they're different. If they're the same, then you could combine them together. There's no need to repeat the same thing multiple times if you're just using the same, if you're using multiple pots of funding for the same project.
There were some comments about the allocation page being blank, but the funding distribution page showing the total amount allocated. Expected.
That seems like something we should probably look in the system and make sure it's right and not looking funky. So that's definitely follow up with after the webinar.
If we're building a new school, can we use facilities funding to support that work?
New school. I'm not sure on that one. We will get back to you.
Can you elaborate on what would be considered allowable expenses for this facility funding's virtual learning infrastructure?
Virtual learning. Yeah, so an example of that would be something like if you were building some sort of learning management system, that would be an example of a virtual learning infrastructure that supports distance learning. Again, if you're looking at a specific cost and wanting to make sure it could be covered with this grant, we're happy to talk one-on-one.
What are the allowable uses for any funds used as a part of the facilities allocation or 25% requirement?
Cool. Yeah, that's going to be easier if we send you a list for facilities. I think there's an existing SOAR document that runs through all of the allowable facilities costs. So if there's a particular cost you have in mind and you want to make sure in the short term whether or not it's allowable, we're happy to share that with you. But there's like a broad range of things that would be allowable for facilities. And like we mentioned, if you don't need them, that's okay. You could just say that your facilities needs have been met through other funding or that you don't have any current needs.
Could ongoing maintenance costs be included in the facilities portion?
You guys are testing me. Stepping in for our team. I don't want to misspeak, so I'd like to look that one up too, to make sure I'm not pointing anyone in the wrong direction.
Can we put a position on the grant if a position ties to the grant objective, but was funded by local funds last year, but we don't have sufficient local funds to fund the position this year due to reduced class sizes?
So if I'm understanding the cost correctly, it's a position that previously existed would otherwise be going away, and you want to know if you can use these fundings to maintain the position.
I believe so.
That rationale seems like it shouldn't be a problem. That doesn't seem like a problem. That seems like it should be fine, especially if you've tied it to some sort of need to continue the support that that position was providing.
This may be related. With regard to the early childhood funds, can we put a position on the grant if a position ties to the grant objective but was funded by local funds last year? I think that's the same thing.
Yeah, I think that's similar. And again, we will certainly look through the questions and who they were from individually to make sure we can follow up on any specific questions that we may not be giving all of the information on right now.
Yeah, there were some questions about HVAC improvements, and if those were allowable, we can get into those specifics when we talk to the team. Someone asked when you said that they're not supplement considerations, could those funds be used as budget relief?
On that one, the answer potentially it's again going to be tied to the needs and the project that's outlined. So if you could draw a through line there, it's possible. Like the scenario someone was just describing of a staff position that may not otherwise have funding. That to me is an example of budget relief, but I think it's a little hard to talk about it broadly in the abstract. So again, if you want to talk about a specific scenario one-on-one, feel free to reach out to our team.
The participant noted that was helpful. Thank you. One more question.
Oh,
awesome. One more question came in. Can things like portable air filters, Chromebooks for kids that have to have at home, and online learning platforms be part of facility funding because of the virtual infrastructure?
Yeah, those should all be workable, that is part of the thinking on having the expanded flexibility around facilities to support distance learning.
Thank you.
The one was just described would also be allowable under academic quality. So like things like Chromebooks, that wouldn't be a problem, even with.
Thank you. That was helpful to the user as well. That is the last question. If you have others, feel free to use the contact information we provided so that we can provide support.
And thank you all for your questions and for your participation today. We will definitely look through the questions and think about if there are any additional resources that we can create or point you to. I do appreciate your flexibility as I'm pitching for our expert on the team this afternoon. And so let us know if you have other questions as you get started. And thank you again for your feedback in this application design and for your feedback and questions as you get started. I hope everyone has a good rest of the day and appreciate anyone who may be watching this on the playback.